Sometimes a game gets so overlooked it pains you. Prey is one of those. You see, back in 2017, Arcane Studios released their best game to date, to reviews reserved for only the most failed of products. And because of this, the game largely went under the radar and was a commercial failure, which in part resulted in one of the heads of the entire studio leaving in shame. And amongst the player base, it was no different. The game was met with vitriol because of its name, which was supposed to be a beloved sequel to yet another underrated game from early 2006. Yet despite all the hate, this hidden gem is one of the most invigorating experiences I've had in games. The world is mysterious and smart, the story and its characters are gripping, but most of all, the gameplay and systems that surround the moment-to-moment action are unparalleled. Because you see, Prey is built on the backs of some of the greats of all time, like Deus Ex, System Shock, and BioShock, and from those foundations has crafted something greater than everything that came before. You can choose to tackle any room how you see fit, whether that's sneaking, hacking, disabling enemy defenses, or going in guns blazing. And with each of these actions you take in the gameplay and story, you are slowly pulling yourself to the end where all of your actions will have drastic consequences on the meaning of your ending. Each gun and gadget has multiple uses, which means you can on the fly come up with genius solutions to every puzzle. Like in the beginning of the game when you discover you can use the glue gun not only for freezing enemies, but for building makeshift ladders to high up places too. The game rewards the player for actually thinking about every situation they are in, and this great design is only further exacerbated in the Mooncrash DLC, coincidentally also the most underrated DLC I've played in my life, better than most games on its own. Because Mooncrash takes this genius formula in the base game and then extends it through the use of multiple characters all with their own abilities, racing against a timer that slowly counts down, it makes the game harder but more rewarding. Mooncrash forces you to make hard decisions between how you will manage resources, which characters to take and in what order, and which escape routes to use at what time, all to make the perfect run that will get you off that damned rock. Trying to get all of your team off the moon base before time runs out was one of the most rewarding challenges I've ever taken on in a game, and it's also one almost no one has even played. Prey, and especially Mooncrash, are special because they are games that actually make us think, in a world worth thinking about. The crazy sci-fi story it tells and space station you inhabit in Prey is one you'll never forget. And while the final act of the game does start to become too hectic with samey enemies and fights, whereas the beginning was perfection, it doesn't take away from the fact that the game and its DLC are some of the most critically underrated things of all time. When people talk about the greatest immersive simulation games ever, or just best games in general, there's always discussions of Deus Ex, System Shock, BioShock, and many more. But I promise you, they all pale in comparison to what Arcane Studios did with Prey, and if you haven't played this game yet, download it right now. There's nothing else quite like it. If you ask most people what their favorite Obsidian game of all time was, many would argue Fallout New Vegas, and a lot of people would then go on to explain why it's actually one of the best games of all time as well, full stop. But for me, it's Obsidian's more recent game, Outer Worlds, that sparked my interest. And that's because Outer Worlds is such an underrated gem in many ways, that people treat like a rejected stepchild to Fallout, when in reality, by many metrics, it's much better. It did review well for many outlets at first, and it had a handful of people singing its praises over time, but recently it just feels like this game has been forgotten. The story of Outer Worlds takes you across multiple different planets and biomes, and in each of those there's a story being told about corporate greed, dejected citizens, and weird fanatical cults. It almost feels like a B-movie rendition of most AAA games, but there's so much charm that comes from that. The dialogue is often funny and witty, the stories are oftentimes crazy and wacky, and most of all, the world just doesn't take itself too seriously. And it's because of this that the Outer Worlds feels unlike anything else in the RPG space, with a very distinct tone and art style that come together to offer a great experience most people haven't even played or have never given a full playthrough. Because it's during that full playthrough that you can start to appreciate just how underloved this game really is. The worlds aren't as dynamic in exploration as, say, a Bethesda game, but there is so much freedom in how you create your character or what decisions you can make in dialogue based on your builds, and the companions you bring along the way offer a great addition to every mission, constantly commentating on what you're doing or have done. In fact, even more than the base game, the DLCs for this world have been absolutely fantastic, taking us to new locations and offering new stories that rival some of the best quests in any of your favorite RPGs. And on top of this, the combat in the game is some of the best in the RPG genre as far as mainstream games go, with gunplay that feels precise and quick, and a selection of different guns and gadgets and attachments to choose from that can radically change your playstyle. I do understand why so many people have written off this first game in the series of Outer Worlds due to the feeling that it isn't quite fully realized yet, and I would tend to agree on that front. But it's a huge shame that more people haven't actually given themselves permission to play and love this game, because what's on offer here is a glimpse into an amazing new sci-fi world with many interesting characters, memorable quests, and just awesome game design that alludes back to some of the RPG greats of old, including Obsidian's very own Fallout New Vegas. If you haven't given Outer Worlds a chance yet, play for at least a couple hours just to see how diverse the builds in game are and how fun the story that unfolds is, all in a world that you can truly get lost in. It's an underrated and somewhat forgotten entry into a series I think could be a massive hit in its sequel if it's done correctly, and I think when that happens, a lot of people will come back to this game and realize just how much they missed.
Here we go!
I played a lot of first-person shooters in my life, but unlike many people who play these games for the multiplayer element, my main drive for much of my life was the single-player side of things. Luckily for us though, there have been many notable FPS campaigns ranging from Call of Duty to Battlefield, but it was only this last year that I finally picked up and tried Titanfall 2, and as crazy as it sounds, it was the best FPS campaign I have ever played in my life, bar none. This game isn't unknown or unloved by any means, as many games on this list will be, but it also surely does not have the love it actually deserves in the community. The campaign in this game specifically is quite literally the perfect definition of what fun is in video games. If someone told me right now they only had 5 to 6 hours to play a game and they wanted those hours to be nothing but pure adrenaline and awesome moments, without question I would recommend Titanfall 2, even amongst other standouts like Doom. And the reason for this is Titanfall 2's campaign takes you on a roaring adventure, where it feels like every level and each new location brings on a new set of mechanics and gameplay elements. Like one level where on the fly you can swap between different periods of time in one level in order to evade enemies or just get past locked doors. Or in another where you have to run up the sides of a building as an entire facility collapses, only to be met with a futuristic training facility you must conquer. And throughout it all, the gameplay at the core of it all is perfect. Chef's kiss. It's fast-paced, fluid, and the gunplay feels precise, and the movement mechanics are the best in any game I've ever played. Running on walls and shooting at the same time feels natural, and the moments where you do get to play in the mechs with different powers and abilities feel like a breath of fresh air. But more than anything, what Titanfall 2's campaign does that is so great is it respects your time. There aren't any filler missions or dialogue, there isn't any side quests that are meant to pad game time. Each and every moment you are playing the campaign is a moment well spent, and I wish more games took this philosophy to heart, because nowadays it's all about making a game long so people feel like they got their money's worth. But the smart among us know that there is one currency more important than money, and it's time. And more than most games, Titanfall 2 respects your time a lot, and more people need to check it out because of that and how underrated it is. SOMA is one of the best sci-fi horror experiences I've ever had in games, and one that will make you think about the tragedy of life itself. And that isn't to say everything about this game is great though. I find a lot of the gameplay and voice acting subpar, some of the environmental design questionable, and personally, I'm not a fan of sneaking helplessly by enemies to survive in games. But the core of this game's story and the world it creates is some of the best in the medium. You start out as a naive man named Simon who's trying out a new health program for his brain issues, where the game then quickly devolves into you being trapped in a future top-secret research facility filled with mystery. The actual gameplay for most of the story revolves around hiding and sneaking from an assortment of different enemies you meet in game, but the heart of what makes SOMA such a memorable experience is just going through that story for the first time. If you haven't played already, the way in which SOMA slowly unveils the story of what actually is going on and what is happening in this creepy and deserted facility Pathos 2 It's something unlike most games out there. The crazy twists and turns of the story lead you down many unpredictable paths to huge revelations that make us ask questions about ourselves and the biggest things in humanity. And that's what makes SOMA shine so much. It's like a good psychological thriller movie of the days of old that not only gives us awesome sci-fi concepts to ponder on, but also questions about ourselves that are too haunting to even think about otherwise. The game dives into the very essence of what it means to be human, to be confused, and most of all, to be alone. I'm purposely being vague on this one because I think the game is best played by knowing as little as possible going in, but I can promise you if you love games that make you think, then SOMA is an experience unlike any other. But because it's a smaller indie game with a lot of jankiness, it's only managed to garner a big cult following, whereas I think there are so many people out there that would otherwise love and enjoy this game too. Even if the gameplay is tedious for you like it was for me, and even if it's very slow at times, the payoff by the finale is well worth it, and with one of the most haunting and thought-provoking endings to a game I've ever seen, that makes the entire journey so memorable.
Strasky, come in. I need help in the lab, the scan room.
What happened?
Conrad killed himself after the scan.
Jesus.
If there's any series from the early 2000s that needs to have a comeback, it's Viva Pinata. This game series was well known for its lovable and whimsical nature, and as a kid I spent countless hours and late nights tending to my garden with all the pinata animals inside. The thing that makes Viva Pinata so special though is just how simple it was. There wasn't any insane and deep RPG mechanics, there wasn't competitive multiplayer or a million different ways to upgrade your garden. It was simple. You had a small plot of land that you slowly grew into a sprawling garden, and with each passing day you caught and bred more and more interesting and high-level pinatas to show off to your friends. It's a harken back to a simpler time in games where the biggest worry was just about having fun, and the thrill of the chase to get the new and coolest pinata was amazing. Trying to acquire the rarest candies to attract the most famed pinatas and afterwards mating your spawn together to create a lasting legacy was potentially the most addicting gameplay loop of all time, and even to this day it works so well. Even with more recent entries like Stardew Valley in many ways perfecting the medium, they still don't quite capture the magic of the Viva Pinata series, which was so focused on giving you that high from just the simple things in life. The music was upbeat and made you feel good, tending to the farm was involved without being tedious, and the entire story you went on to build the coolest farm ever is one I'll never forget. It's a series that surely needs to have a comeback in the coming years with some new additions from more recent farming games, but even to this day it stands out as a crowning achievement of the time. If you love farming simulations or zoo tycoons, then Viva Pinata in a lot of ways is the perfect mix of the two. That more than anything is just fun to play at all times, and never fails to put a smile on your face, something that a lot of games try to do nowadays, but fail. It's one of the most underrated games of all time, and if you haven't picked it up, give it a shot. I mentioned earlier on this list how the failure of Prey for Arcane Studios resulted in one of their best creators leaving the entire studio. Well, for those of you that don't know, the creator was Rafael Colantonio, and the first game from his new studio, just like Prey, is an unbelievably underloved and played game. Weird West takes the player on an adventure across a fantastical western location using 5 different playable characters. And just like the lineage of many of the studio heads before this game, Weird West is all about emergent and simulated gameplay. Moving from location to location takes time, and that means many missions you are on could reach a failure state if you don't do them quick enough. And as you travel, you can stumble upon random events and situations that can change your playthrough entirely. And throughout all of this, you have a main mission of figuring out what exactly is going on in this Weird West. And to do so, you have to play 5 separate campaigns, each with their own character who has their own unique personality and moveset. The genius of the game comes in with how this all intertwines though. The actions you take with one character early on in the story can drastically affect the entire world with your future characters. And you are even able to go back and recruit your old characters to your team as your new characters, something I've not seen in any other games. It's this systematic approach to game design that makes Weird West so awesome, and it carries over to everything. You can use your character to move a barrel to the side of a building in order to climb up on the scaffolding and get to the roof, or you can sneak past the guards through the back door and hide in a dresser, or you can just take your gun out and cause a massive scene. Every mission has multiple ways to tackle it, and the decisions you make on one can drastically affect the world. For example, if you go in guns blazing and murder everyone in your way, you may get a bounty put on your head. And even more crazy, the families of the loved ones that you have killed may now come after you in-game and run up on you while you're in an important mission. And what makes Weird West so amazing though, is that all of these different and interesting systems, whether it be bounties and families, guns and gadgets, or just what upgrade paths you go down for each character, and the narrative decisions you make along with them, they all affect the world in very big ways, so much so that the decisions can literally result in the exile of entire races of people from the lands. It's the type of game that really shows you just why games are so special and what makes them unique. None of these moments could happen in a movie or most other games because the world really becomes whatever you make it. It's funny too because westerns are one of my least favorite genres of all time. Honestly, I just don't really like them at all. But this game was so good on a systematic and design level with so many interesting choices to make and ideas to commit to that I couldn't help but fall in love with it. Sadly, it's so under the radar since it's the first game from a new studio and it's an indie game that many people will simply look at and decide it's not for them without even giving it a shot. But it truly is one of the best experiences I have had in gaming in some time, and potentially the best immersive sim since Prey. The fact it didn't even get nominated for any awards at the Game Awards and hasn't seen a lot of love from the community is criminal, because I know for a fact that this is the type of game that so many of you will play and wonder, how didn't I find this sooner?